So here's a video I've been meaning to make a while. I've come across a bunch of these and it doesn't seem to be any useful information on YouTube that I could find anyways with these heated ceilings. This one, I've come across a bunch of these over the years. This one seems to be a little bit more involved as far as how extensive the repair had to be. I did another one a couple months ago, but none of what I had to do had any direct contact with the heating tubes, but they were a bunch of holes around the heating tubes, and you could see all of the bulges from the heating tubes over the years, and the shrink and expand in the ceiling from the system being turned on, fired up, brought up to whatever temperature it's held at. And then over the summer months you have the cooling, and then over time, I think this house was built in the 50s, you start to see where all of your pipes are. This one, though, was mostly damaged due to a roof leak, specifically around a chimney, and a few other areas had since been replaced, but the plaster, for the most part, was in good shape. It was pretty ugly, except for this bad spot around the fireplace, which started off pretty small, but once we started picking at it, became pretty good size. So what you want to do is cut out anything that's loose or moldy or damaged back to the solid drywall, wherever that may be. This ended up being pretty bad, and the guys that did the rock ahead of me were pretty good. They're surgeons, being careful around those water lines, and also finding good spots to anchor the drywall that they put up, and then re-anchored the heating tubes. The reason they tried to save this, it was a very expensive fix. However, replacing the heating system was, I want to say, something like $80,000, the bid that they got to, and they had to either do it all or do none of it. They couldn't isolate it for whatever reason. I'm not going to get into that because I don't know anything about that, to be honest. All I'm going over is just a quick overlook of the steps involved. Because I've seen, I don't know why you would heat a ceiling. In this space, there was no living space above this ceiling. It was outside. The floor was also heated, and also inside of the walls there was pipes that went, up and down, servicing it. That it's just hanging a picture in this house could be treacherous. I actually found one digging out caulked corners and making them crisp, and one of the corners had a copper line right below the surface of the paint. This house, what really kicked it off was the updating of the electrical system. They added quite a bit of lighting, recessed lighting. They did that with a thermal gun. They didn't just cut willy-nilly. But as a result, they turned the whole ceiling to Swiss cheese. And because it was a heated ceiling, any other situation, and I would just say rock over the ceiling, but because it was the heated ceiling, they wanted to preserve what was there. So they took the extra step in calling me. So the first thing you want to do, like I said before, is make sure everything that's loose is off. In this case, it ended up being all of the paint and cheesecloth that was over the old system, which exposed quite a few more areas of damage from roof leaks. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the base layer that you're putting on has a good bond to the rest of the system. So what I like to use is a heavy oil kills over the entire surface and let that cure out, get good and dry. I had fans set up, and as it got going, I started to find more bubbles and blisters in other areas. And the walls were actually in pretty good shape, but those also got a kills coat, digging out any of the cracks along the way. And then, as far as the plaster area over the heated pipes, one thing I will say is to make sure that those copper lines are coated, because the plaster that I put on, which is a gypsolite or gypsum plaster, is a very heavy lime plaster and acidic, so it will react with the copper lines. So make sure that all the copper that is exposed is coated with like a really heavy kills or something that's going to seal it up really good. Do your research. These were already coated, so I didn't have to worry about it too much. However, I did use a pink plaster weld, which is only a glue. It does not seal it. It is strictly to make sure that the plaster that I use will stick to the ceiling. Had I had a little bit more time before this one, they were kind of in a rush for the holidays, but the rockers used a regular 5/8 drywall preferably it would have been a blue board, but in my area that's a little bit more, I don't want to say special order, but it's harder to get, so gray board was used at this time. And this plaster world used to be available everywhere, but the only place I could find it was on Amazon, oddly enough, which I'll post a link for. This is good stuff. It'll make your gypsolite stick to it. But again, this is not to seal it. This is strictly to make sure that you have a good bond between the plaster and the drywall surface. So then after that's done, you're going to want to let it dry out really good. And then what happens is you mix up your plaster. And gypsolite is meant to go on real thick. It's really strong and it's really fluffy, and it's relatively lightweight compared to like a base coat, but it goes on thick. So you're going to want to mix it up nice and fluffy, not too thick where you can't trowel it, but not too loose you can't build it also. And it's done in layers. The first coat, you're just kind of coating everything, and then you can use which is like I think we call them a rake, which is it looks like a fan kind of, and you rake the surface of it to give it a lot of texture. And what that does is it creates a lot more surface area for the next layer to bond to. Otherwise, I've used notch trowels before, or even an old piece of metal lath. If that's what you happen to be using. This house happens to be rock lath, so we replaced it with drywall. We didn't do the lath plaster. And again, before you even do all this, verify that the system doesn't have any leaks in it before you do any of this. Also make sure the roof doesn't have any leaks, and also make sure there's no mold or anything else, because once you do this, you are not going to want to touch it or agitate it in any way, because this is going to be another 60 years before anyone else opens it up. Hopefully never, but never say never, right? So typically I would do like the next day with the next coat. You're not going to want to let it sit too long, because you want it to be wet enough to where the next coat doesn't just totally dry out right away when you put the next coat on, but also you want it dry enough to that the second coat bonds to it. The next coat you're going to want to use like something like either a Derby or a 20-inch trowel to really shape it. This is kind of the harder one, and you're just going right up to the edge of the existing plaster and filling it to that level and shaping it so it has a nice, is close to the same level as before. Now that layer you're going to want to let cure out nice and slow. Think of it like concrete. Don't put any fans on it. Don't put a dehumidifier near it. Let it dry out nice and slow. This one I let it sit for a week, and that seemed to be dry enough for the space. Then I went over the entire surface with a thick stow mesh, which is like an exterior mesh, to replace that cheesecloth after I'd done all the kills and everything, so I knew it was going to stick. And then from that point, it was just like skimming a regular wall with hardwood first, embedding the mesh, making sure it's nice and flat, checking it on the X and the Y axis, and making sure that it really has a good flat surface. You're never going to get these ceilings completely flat, but what you can do is make it so that when the light hits it, it rolls off nice and gently, and you don't see any ridges or harsh lines. But typically these are almost never completely flat. From that point, then you just sand it, and you treat it like any other drywall job, paint, and you are done. Again, we found a lot of water damage. This was a pretty expensive fix, but at the same time, I'm going to say it was probably medium hardness, but this is coming from a guy that does it all the time, so it might be a bit tough for a homeowner to do. The main thing is to make sure that you make it sure that it's flat with the gypsolite, and it's always easier to add to a surface than it is to take away. So whatever you do, don't hump it with the gypsolite, because once that gets completely hard, getting it off is going to be almost impossible without damaging the pipes. So let me know about your projects and any questions or comments in the comments below. I do check them. I do read them. Let me know what you guys think. Some ceilings vary. Some are lath, some are drywall, some are, in this case, this is rock lath with a thick plaster veneer over it. But the principles are all pretty much the same. This is a real world example of a heated ceiling. I don't know why they did them that way back in the day, but This house has it all the way through the house, floor and ceiling. So, and like I said, they couldn't isolate it, so they had to fix it or tear it all out. It would have been like 80 grand or something crazy. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.